Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Constitution Center. We're very much looking forward to tonight's conversation about education. But before we start, I did want to ask you to join me in a moment of silence for the victims in Las Vegas. Our thoughts are with them. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a special and meaningful night. We are here to commemorate, celebrate, and express appreciation for the passion for education of a great friend of the National Constitution Center, the late Jack Templeton. Jack's vision made possible the most important educational initiatives that the Constitution Center has undertaken since I started here in 2013. The centerpiece of Jack Templeton's vision was the Coalition of Freedom that would bring together the leading liberal and conservative lawyers groups in America to co-host a series of educational programs whose centerpiece is the amazing interactive Constitution. And you've all heard me talk about it. How many people have downloaded or used the interactive Constitution? That is great, about half. Well, the rest of you, after this show is over, download the Interactive Constitution app, along with the 11 million people who have learned from this incredible tool, and click on any part of the Constitution and see the leading liberal and conservative scholars in America discussing what they agree about and what they disagree about. This incredible model of civil dialogue, which is a constitutional feast of substance, has gone to classrooms across the country. It's been the basis for debates that are traveling across America. It's the model for our podcasts, which are engaging learners of all ages from 8 to 80. And thanks to a new grant from the Templeton Foundation, we are now going to take this tool and bring it to classrooms across America by creating lessons plans and teacher training workshops and allowing this amazing content to educate and inspire students of all ages. So I feel every day that I'm here grateful to Jack Templeton for having made all of this possible, grateful to his visionary daughter, Heather Dill Templeton, for continuing to support us. And the collaboration is just such a meaningful example of how a vision, and Jack had a vision that it was important for both sides in these polarized times to talk civilly with each other and learn about history together. That became a reality. So you can now understand with what heartfelt pleasure I have as I introduce to you the head of the John F. Templeton Foundation, Heather Dill Templeton. Or Heather Templeton Dill, but both are.
My husband and I joke about that all the time. It's great when we check into a hotel and I can't find a reservation for Heather Dill. Oh, Heather Templeton, yes. So we joke about that all the time. But thank you for your kind introduction, and thank you for your efforts to put together this evening's lecture. Even though my father is no longer with us today, our family continues to sponsor this annual lecture. I'll say a few words about that in a moment. But I would also like to begin by thanking the team here at the National Constitution Center for your dedication to educating the American public about the Constitution. As a mother of 4 boys and as a former high school government teacher, I can tell you that our children do not know as much as they ought to know about the Constitution, the principles upon which it was founded, and the fragility of the American experiment. And the National Constitution Center has been a great partner. Jeff mentioned the grant from the John Templeton Foundation, which helped the Constitution Center launch the Interactive Constitution. Jeff said to wait until after to download this, but actually part of my remarks here are that you could download it right now. While I'm talking, I won't be offended, so if you want to go ahead and search the App Store. But once Jeff returns to the podium, and certainly once our speaker is introduced and comes to the podium, then you should put your phones away. But the Interactive Constitution is just a great resource. It provides easy access to the history of the Constitution, varying views on how to interpret aspects of the Constitution. There's even a tool to compare the US Constitution with governing documents from around the world. So with this this tool, you can access the Constitution at any time, especially if you have it on your phone. Teachers have a vast array of resources at their disposal, and I have the perfect source for my 8th grade son's project on the 4th Amendment, so it's a wonderful tool. But this lecture tonight is also another way in which the National Constitution Center is a great partner in ensuring that the embers of liberty remain bright in the hearts and minds of the American public. My father sponsored many lectures, and he participated in many public events on topics that he thought were really important, because he hoped that each event would inspire people to act. In his mind, it wasn't enough to attend a lecture and affirm the words of the speaker. He really hoped that people would think differently as a result of the lectures and events he sponsored. This is how he spent many of his charitable dollars throughout his lifetime, but especially over the last 20 years. Tonight, we explore another important topic, the state of education in America today. My father was a pediatric surgeon who spent his career saving and transforming lives at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, but he was really a teacher at heart. Towards the end of his life, he said that in his next career, after stepping down from his role at the John Templeton Foundation, he was going to teach 6th grade. And indeed, when I decided to become a teacher, Dad was my biggest champion. He actually purchased curriculum on his own that I could use for my classroom. He left articles and videos, VHS videos at the time, actually outside my door, that I could use in my classroom. And he gave me great ideas for use in my classroom as well. Many of the projects that I assigned to my students emerged from conversations with my father. Dad knew, as we all knew, that a quality education is vital for individual success, but he also knew that a quality education is vital for the welfare of our entire nation. Dad worried endlessly about how an education in the United States compared to education around the world. He tried desperately to convince anyone and everyone that we needed to improve education in the United States. And so tonight, I hope you come away with a better understanding of the state of American education. I hope you find some way to take what you hear and apply it in your community or in your local schools. Improving education is really hard work. Our ideas and policies for reform will not always succeed. They will be challenged, and early success may not lead to transformation. But we should continue working hard to improve access to a high-quality education for every student in the United States. The lecture this evening gives us another opportunity to reflect on the challenges and to consider solutions. And let me end with a brief word to those of you who are educators, whether you're in the room or listening from the video. You have a really, really important job. We can craft the greatest policies, we can excite with compelling rhetoric, but these efforts would not make a difference without the commitment of individual teachers who work on the front lines. Do not underestimate the influence of a good teacher. If you feel that you can't possibly have an impact on the big challenges in education today, find a teacher, encourage them in their task, and let them know how much you appreciate their hard work and dedication. In my own view, given what's at stake, teachers should be some of the most highly compensated professionals in the world today. I'm not sure we can change that, but we can at least say thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather, for that inspiring reminder of the centrality of teaching. It is so meaningful that you are a teacher, that your dad wanted to be one. I am a teacher, and I, like you, have come to believe that it's the highest calling. There's no prouder and more important role than to be a teacher, and there's no more important role that you have as a citizen than to be a student. You must be lifelong learners, and you must use your moments of leisure to continue to educate yourself so you can grow in wisdom and knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, it's so meaningful also tonight, in a great moment of synchronicity, to bring together these two great friends of the Constitution Center, Jack Templeton and Heather and the Templeton Foundation, and Governor Jeb Bush. Governor Bush is a former chair of the National Constitution Center. He was chair when I started in 2013. And his passion for education suffused his time with us at the Constitution Center and has defined his work before and after he spent time with us here. He told me, I think I can share, that he'd agreed to join the Constitution Center because his father, President Bush 41, had been chair of the center before, and President Bush told Governor Bush that chairing the Constitution Center was his most meaningful post-presidential service. And my understanding is that President Bush felt that because he was so inspired by the Constitution Center's educational mission, and Governor Bush embodied that as well. He connected us with a series of wonderful educational partners, ranging from Intelligence Squared, the great debating group that we hold debates across the country with, to the College Board, which has adopted the interactive Constitution as a centerpiece of the new AP History and Government exams. And it was so wonderful for all of his friends at the Constitution Center to see, after he left us and was out traveling across America, to talk about his time at the Constitution Center with fondness and to say that it was meaningful. He was elected Florida's 43rd governor in 1998. He was Florida's Secretary of Commerce. In governor, he focused on educational reform, and under his leadership, Florida students made the greatest gains in achievement, and Florida was one of a handful of states that narrowed the achievement gap. After his time here, he became founder, president, and chairman of the Foundation for Excellence in Education, one of the most innovative groups arguing for educational change, and we're going to hear about that. I am so looking forward to his thoughts about the future of education, and then to having a conversation with him and you about how he thinks we can reform education in America. Please join me in welcoming the former chair of the Constitution Center, Governor Jeb Bush.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you all. Thanks. Thank you, Jeff. Heather, thank you so much. Mrs. Templeton, thank you for being here. I'm honored to be here to discuss education. I'm a big fan of the Templeton family, starting with Sir John, who had a large presence in Florida. Once you're governor of a state, you have to shamelessly promote the state in terms of business climate and the like, and Sir John Templeton was smart enough to not to have to be recruited. He figured out Florida was paradise for business, was a neighbor of ours as well, and your father was a spectacular man as well, and I'm just honored to be here. Jeff, thank you for your service and the great work that you're doing. I think Jeff needs a little more enthusiasm, don't you think? He has his fiancée here, but I know his first love is the Constitution. I think he's madly in love with it, and it's contagious. And thank goodness there are people that are in love with our Constitution, because if you think about what's going on in our country today, the tragedy in Las Vegas is just so heartbreaking, or the suffering that's going on in the U.S. Virgin Islands, or in Puerto Rico, or in my state of Florida, or certainly in Texas. The world is full of tumult, it's full of just tragedy all around us. But the simple fact is that the governing manual for this country is the greatest that's ever been created. And it's something that I think we need to spread with enthusiasm all across the land to remind us that when we get it right, no one can stop the United States of America. We'll recover from every one of the tragedies we face. And one of the elements, one of the reasons is that, that our Constitution sets us apart from the rest of the world. It's one of America's greatest exports as well. We're living in one of the most exciting times. It's depressing if you watch cable news. I started watching ESPN, but you know, now sports has taken over that too. Kind of hard to watch the Weather Channel, to be honest with you, these days. I'm resorting maybe Hallmark Cards Channel or something like that. I'm not watching much television, but we are living in exciting and really precarious times at the same time. And certainly we're living in crazy times, that's for sure. Technology has provided us with limitless opportunities to innovate and customize every aspect of our lives in ways that just a decade ago was just a dream. Today it's a reality for millions and millions of people. Companies like Amazon and Google and Apple are upending commerce and entertainment. Uber and Lyft are challenging the transportation system, which is really the lifeblood. It's in our DNA as a nation. And all of this brings great benefits, but it also brings a lot of angst. My personal opinion is, and I'm not here to speak about politics, I don't think it's the wall doesn't exist, and by the way, Mexico's not going to pay for it. It's not the things that in the campaigns we talked about. It's this rapid pace of technology and the disruption that it brings that is creating the anxiety for more and more Americans. And it's legitimate as we see all of this unfold. I'll give you an example. UPS think of all the data that UPS accumulates for every truck. It has a little GPS monitor. It can track every truck in the world. And they determine, their data nerds determine that if they stop taking left turns, except in the UK, of course, if they stop taking left turns, they could save a lot of money. And the net result of that simple innovation, because of the ability to use big data and mine it in an appropriate way, was that they saved hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2. They saved tens of thousands of miles. They saved millions of dollars of lower fuel costs. They also needed 1,000 fewer trucks in their global fleet, which means there's 1,000 fewer truck drivers. You extrapolate out all of the innovations that are taking place, and what used to be the source of a middle-class life and middle-class jobs now is being threatened in all sorts of ways. The social fabric of our country historically has helped us in that regard. We've created a safety net that has been unique to the world. Strong families, incredibly loving and vibrant communities. We're the greatest country in the world as it relates to, we were at least, on how we organize ourselves and how we associate. All the civic organizations in our country. All those things in the past have been strong and vibrant, and they've allowed us to dust ourselves off and get back in the game. Well, today, all those mitigating institutions that we've relied on, that the founders envisioned would be strong and vibrant, that we were a self-governing people, have been torn asunder. And so, yeah, it makes sense to me why it is that people are anxious. And increasingly, we rely on government to fill that void that traditionally has been in a bottom-up way, taken care of in a different way. And in the hyper-partisan world we're in today, the government is not working to the extent that it has to. There is much that needs to be done to put our nation back on the proper path. But tonight I'd like to talk about one thing that we must do to ride the tide of innovation rather than be drowned by it, to ride the tide so that more and more Americans benefit from this extraordinary time that we're living in. We must urgently work to transform our nation's education system. And in doing so, we'll address one of the great challenges of our time, the stagnant mobility that exists in our country, the lack of mobility, and the income inequality that gives people great concern. Consider these alarming statistics, if you will. According to the NAEP, the nation's report card, nearly 2/3 of our fourth graders cannot do fourth grade math, and more than 60% are not reading at fourth grade level. Let me repeat that, because for the teachers in this room, you know that when you start fourth grade, you're beginning to learn things. And if you can't read, how can you expect anybody to do math and science? You learn to read up till third grade, beginning in fourth grade, you're reading to learn. And if 60% of our students aren't reading at grade level, you can begin to see the gaps grow. Just 37% of today's students will leave high school ready for college work or a good job. This is despite spending more per student than any country in the world, other than a couple of countries, the Benelux countries. I got PolitiFacted when I ran. You may not have remembered, I ran for president. It was a short-lived trip of about a year. And I made this statement that we spend more per student than any country in the world. And I got PolitiFacted, and it was like a 3-alarm fire lie or something like that, because I didn't include the Benelux countries, Luxembourg and Belgium. It's about a half a greater Pennsylvania area for students. I apologize to the arbiters of PolitiFact. We are amongst the countries that spend more per student than any country in the world, and these results are quite damning. Among first-year college students, 1.7 million of them need remedial help. Currently, more than half of the students entering our community college system and nearly 1 out of 5 entering our 4-year universities are placed in remediation for basic coursework. In effect, to put it in plain spoken English, They're redoing high school math and high school reading before they begin to get college credits. Sadly, we have doubled the debt in the last 6 years to $1.3 trillion. Recourse debt on the backs of students, many of whom do not get a degree because we've lowered expectations down and there's no outcry when we don't get the results that we need. In the next few years, 65% of all job openings will require some post-secondary education, along with effective literacy and math skills. According to the study by Complete College America, less than 1/3 of full-time students, and for those who graduated like I did a long time ago, full-time equivalent students is now 12 credit hours, not 15. So it's impossible if you took 12 credit hours to get a degree in 4 years. But only 1/3 of our students that start that journey actually get a 4-year degree in 4 years. The data is even more disconcerting when you look at it compared to our peers around the rest of the world, where American students on the PISA test recently fell to 37th in the world in international math assessments. We have to do better as a nation, and I know we can. Education is the great equalizer. It's the cure for poverty. It's the gateway of achieving earned success. But in every state, children remain trapped in failing schools, and the education system, the governance model, is designed around an agricultural model for 180 days because all the kids, as you know, have to get into the fields to begin to pick the crops, and an industrial model on top of them as well. 13,100 plus government-run monopolized school districts is the governance model for K-12 education. Now, that may have worked when the industrial model worked, when GM had 300,000 employees and wasn't bankrupt. It may have worked 50 years ago, but to expect that model to work with the diverse student population that we have today, with the technology that we have that we can apply in new creative ways to assure that students learn, I think we're dooming ourselves to failure. Innovation and globalization have changed the nature of the workforce, and so whatever exists today that's, I'm not trying to depress you, but I hope you get alarmed by these numbers, they're only going to get worse as the skills required grow and grow, and yet we're stuck and mired in the system that hasn't developed and evolved like many other institutions in our society. A recent study out of McKinsey & Company forecasted that nearly half of the jobs American workers are paid to perform, about $2 trillion of payroll in the United States, could be automated in some way with existing technology. And if you imagine that technology will continue to cascade in our lives, more and more will be automated. Last year, the Labor Department reported that there was a record 5.9 million unfilled job openings for skilled workers because employers couldn't find the skilled workers that are necessary to fill those jobs. We don't need a crystal ball to see that America's future is bleak with a poorly educated workforce. And a lot of dreams will be shattered. Because frankly, this is a debate that we're not having. Kids are shocked when they take the entry test to go to a community college and they have to retake math and reading. Parents are shocked that their children who were given A's throughout their high school career are not qualified to go to college. Everybody's shocked that 60% of full-time equivalent students graduate with a 4-year degree in our great public university system in 6 years. And businesses are shocked that they cannot find people prepared to take on the jobs of today, and over the horizon as they look, they see it even being worse. Last month, the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg Public Policy Center released its annual Constitution Day Civics Survey. It's not just about reading and writing and arithmetic. It's also about civics and understanding our history and the things that tie us together that has created real challenges. And education citizenry is not just about economics, it's also about how we organize ourselves in a loving way where we solve problems in community settings. The results were stunning for me. Maybe you all are up here and you see these numbers. Jeff sees it all the time, but it's really sad. Nearly 40% of individuals surveyed could not name even one right guaranteed by the First Amendment. Barely 1/4 could name all 3 branches of our government. What's past is prologue. Without possessing a sense of our country's rich history, how will the next generation be equipped to address the new challenges America's face, so many of which parallel our past trials and tribulations? Despite being home to one of the most diverse populations on the planet, we have historically been a people with a set of shared values that have tied us together. In fact, the American experience is so unique in that regard. Race is not an identifier of national citizenship or ethnicity. It is the set of shared values that you embrace when you come to this country or you're born here. And that has begun to erode. And as our country becomes more polarized, we're growing apart and moving further apart from the qualities that have made this country an exceptional one. Let me pause here because as a former politician, I found it, I always had kind of a visceral reaction to politicians that talked about American exceptionalism. And what I know to be true is we're an extraordinary country for sure, and we're exceptional in many ways. But exceptionalism is earned each and every day. It has to be earned. It's not just there to talk about all the time. Each day as American citizens, we have to earn it. That's what has made our country great, and as that erodes, we begin to see the pitfalls of not having a set of shared values and a commitment to bigger things as American citizens. So the question is, what should we do about this? I've hopefully have now made you so depressed that you're looking for an answer. Generally, people from both sides of the political spectrum can agree that we do have challenges. Someone from the left, I'm from the right, someone from the left could get up and basically depict a similar kind of set of facts that we're in general agreement on. But that agreement begins to erode when we start thinking about what the solutions are. And I'm not here to say that my solutions are the only ones. I passionately believe in them. I have fought the fight to apply them state by state where education policy goes. But I believe that there are good ideas across the board. But I'm going to give you my ideas because you invited me. So here are 7 points that I believe could be the catalyst for a transformed education system that would allow people the right to rise again, to restore a sense of unity and purpose for all of us together as American citizens. First and foremost, all parents should have the right to send their children to the school they choose, regardless of the zip code or income barriers that they may have. I believe that the great American experience embedded in that is that we give people choices and they use those choices wisely when they have the proper information, and it brings about continuous improvement. The fact is that in America, the great majority of students go to the school that is assigned them by bureaucrats, and parents may like those schools or they may not. But it's not determined by parents. And I think school choice across the board would be one step, not an end by its means, not an end to having the kind of education system we need, but a catalyst for improvement. That means choice for public schools, private schools, parochial schools, charter schools, virtual schools, blended schools, schools that are focused on creating partnerships inside the community, home education. Across the board, parents need to be making many more choices. And the places where they have embraced this in the proper way with the proper accountability have had the greater learning gains across the country. In my home state of Florida, this last week, a research from the Urban Institute was announced, which showed that the children that are taking corporate tax scholarship money and going to private schools have significantly better chances for like-kind students compared to like-kind students in the public schools of going to college. The next step would be that they would also have improvement for university graduation. That's still work in progress because many of these students have just begun their journey in these private schools. The charter school movement began 25 years ago and now counts 2.5 million students. There's been great progress, and there's some extraordinary charter schools here in Pennsylvania and across the country. The one thing about charter schools, if they don't work, they close, and someone else comes to do something better. That's what we need, is to have some kind of degree of accountability that parents know that there's a seriousness about student learning being the organizing principle of the schools. Last month, under the leadership of Governor Bruce Rauner and the Illinois legislature, after 2 or 3 years of gridlock, they passed a $75 million corporate tax scholarship program to allow low-income kids to go to private schools in places where the schools have completely failed these kids, particularly African American Hispanic kids in the big urban areas. If Bruce Rauner in Illinois, with the food fight that he had, can make a small step towards opening up their system, then other states should do the same. If fully unleashed, I have no doubt that education freedom could prove as powerful as economic freedom when it comes to long-term prosperity for our country. Second, we need to raise the bar. High expectations, if you're a mom or a dad, or if you're in business, or if you're in a civic group, and certainly in schools, higher expectations yield better results. It's time for us to stop the excusing away of why some kids can learn and some kids can't. Simple as that. There's all sorts of reasons why people struggle in life, but to assume that they can't learn because of those struggles dooms them. Dooms them. The simple fact is we should have high expectations for every child, irrespective of the level of income of their family. If not, we doom them to a life where they're not going to be able to live a life of purpose and meaning. That means higher accountability. It means higher standards across the board. It means that we have greater transparency so that when there is a problem, someone pauses, an adult pauses and organizes around that child in a different way. In Florida, we started this by grading schools. Hold on to your seats here. This is a radical idea. It may shock you. A, B, C, D, and F. 100% based on student learning. And when we started, you would have thought the world was coming to an end, that we were grading schools the way students were being graded in those very schools. And the net effect was, no one wanted to be an F school. And everybody knew what an F school was. And everybody wanted to be an A school. And we rewarded the improvement to get them there. Any school that had an improvement would get $100 per student direct to the school. Any school that was F and stayed F, their parents were allowed to go to other public schools or private schools until that was ruled unconstitutional for a period of time. And what we saw with this accountability and ending social promotion in third grade and raising standards for high school graduation across the board was that these students met the challenge. Florida was 29th out of 31 in the fourth grade reading test, the nation's report card, the NAEP test, in 1998. After 10 years of a lot of struggle, we went to 6th out of 50. 29th out of 31 to 6th out of 50. Low-income kids led the way. Kids with learning disabilities led the way. Hispanic kids led the way. African-American kids led the way because we had transparent accountability and high expectations for all. I come here to tell you, don't let anybody tell you that students can't learn. You doom that child if you believe that that's the case. We can excuse it away, or we can change how we organize ourselves around these students, and we'll get a better result. Similarly, states that have made bold decisions as it relates to ending social promotion have seen similar kind of gains. It's not easy in political life to say that if you can't read by the end of third grade, you don't go to fourth grade. That's tough. But the fact is we cut our functional illiteracy rate in Florida by half by doing that. And other states have seen similar kind of improvements because of it. Third, we need to respect and treat teachers like the modern professionals they aspire to be, capable of creativity, worthy of autonomy, and deserving of personal accountability. This is an essential element because a great teacher in a classroom compared to a teacher that is failing those students, there'll be a one-year net gain. You don't get your teacher assigned when your child goes to elementary school. A great teacher will teach a year's and a half worth of knowledge more or less in a year's time. A mediocre or a poor teacher will teach a half a year's worth of knowledge. We need to make sure that that great teacher stays in the classroom by rewarding them because we know that they're doing a great job. We need to pay teachers more when they're in underserved areas. We need to pay teachers more in underserved subject matter, such as math and science. And bad teachers need remediation. And if it continues to be a problem, school districts ought to have the right to fire teachers. Why would we suggest in any other aspect of our life that we would allow poor teachers to be in front of our kids? We don't do that in any other aspect of our life. We shouldn't do it for teachers. So in order for teachers to be treated like professionals and respected, they need to be paid more, but there should be rewards for the improvement that they bring, and there should be a different consequence when they don't deliver a year's worth of knowledge in a year's time. Let's hire and retain teachers in totally different ways. The idea that the only way you can become a classroom teacher is to have a school of education degree at a university where frankly, most of the schools of education don't teach teachers how to teach kids how to read. They may become experts on the history of education, but they're not delivering the kind of quality teaching. Teachers have to learn this on their own. So we should have teacher development programs and not assume that because a student gets a 4-year degree and has got an education degree that they're capable of learning teaching from day one. Fourth, innovation in technology is the disruptor. It also is a solution for education as well. That means we need to tailor funding formulas away from this homogenized industrial model where seat time is the measurement of how much money schools get, to customize it so time, in effect, is the variable. Time is the variable and learning's the constant. So the funding formula needs to move with the child. As they learn, the funding should go towards that. Universities have the credit system, which allows for more customization. The K-12 learning systems need to have funding that is in the 21st century. That is not possible today, but we're moving towards a competency-based system where we personalize and customize the learning experience for each child. Imagine the struggle of a teacher today in a class of 25 or 22 or 21 kids. You have 4 or 5 high-achieving kids motivated to learn. You have 4 that are motivated to learn, perhaps, but are struggling for all sorts of different, distinct reasons. They don't not learn in the same way. And then you have kids in the middle. A teacher today is having to make a tough choice. To whom do I teach? If you don't customize it, you teach to the median. And so the high-achieving kids are held back, many of which get bored to tears when they could learn far faster. The kids that are struggling are pushed along, even though they didn't master the material. And maybe 2 or 3 of the kids in the middle garner the kind of education we would expect every child in that classroom to do it. Today, innovation and technology allow us to customize the learning experience and turn this on its head. But that, again, requires change in policy so that funding follows the child and that we truly focus on making sure that every child reaches their God-given ability, irrespective of whether that result yields a different result. My guess is, in that system, over a decade time, we would have a whole lot of kids that were starting as sophomores or juniors in college, saving their parents and themselves a ton of money. We would also have a whole lot of students that were college and or career ready when they finished high school because they were pushed along at the right path. And all those young people that were struggling and dropped out would be given a fighting chance to live in the world that we're moving towards. Sixth, our higher education system. Fifth, real quick, I love the 10th Amendment. Give power back to the states and give them the freedom to innovate, and they'll do a far better job than any of the top-down driven mandates that we've seen over the last 2 generations of time. Enough said. Sixth, our higher education institutions are just as ripe for sweeping reforms as our K-12 system is as well. We've rested on the laurels of extraordinarily fine universities being considered, all universities. University of Pennsylvania is a phenomenal school, but that's not the model for 95% of all the students that are taking higher education courses today. The change that is necessary there is equally as important as it is in K-12 to get to Jeff's idea of lifelong learning. The lack of accountability in higher ed has left generations of students shortchanged, both figuratively and literally. You know what the #1 degree program is for a 4-year degree in America today? Psychology. Now, for those that, I'm not against psychology or psychologists, but we don't have a shortage of psychologists. We have a shortage of information technologists. We have a shortage of coders. We have a shortage of people in the health sector that are saving people's lives. We have a shortage of teachers. We have a shortage of nurses. We don't have a shortage of the #1 degree program in our country. And yet, the minute you suggest that maybe they should alter that a little bit, you're invading into academic freedom. Trust me, I know. Tonight, I will get a few emails in this regard. This is not an invasion into academic freedom to suggest that universities need to be more relevant, more accountable, deliver more degrees at a lower cost so that parents and students are not loaded up with recourse debt on their back that make it hard for them to start their life's journey. The Brookings Institution released a survey 2 weeks ago, about the subject of campus life. And it was as disturbing as the Annenberg study. Less than 40% of undergraduate students at four-year U.S. colleges understood what kind of speech was protected under the First Amendment. Wow. You know, I could see that for the Seventh Amendment. I don't even know what the Seventh Amendment is, Jeff. I know the First Amendment, and I know what's protected. And it's the speech that I don't like sometimes, but it's protected, and it should be protected. If we're in a world today where we have safe zones and microaggressions, all this nonsense that's going on, how do we expect young people to be able to pursue knowledge, to be challenged, to have their views challenged, to challenge other people's views? Universities should be places where there's a lively debate across the board, and yet students today think otherwise. Less than half of the college students surveyed believe their school should provide an open learning environment representing a diverse set of viewpoints, if any of those viewpoints were deemed to be offensive to students. Well, just about everything is offensive to students these days. How are we going to have the kind of learning that will allow the United States to lead the world? We should shuck off the political correctness and challenge young people just as they should challenge us. That's how America has always progressed. And at a time when we need young people to be the challengers, they have to be challenged as well. Their viewpoints should be honed by the skills that come from lively debate. To be clear, protecting the safety of students should be the foremost goal of any institution, academic or otherwise. But shielding students from different viewpoints is the collegiate equivalent of handing out participation trophies in Little League. We're not going to compete in a world that is anxious to compete with us with that kind of attitude. Finally, I would suggest to you that one of the great challenges of our time, education or otherwise, is the erosion of a set of shared values. The National Constitution, I think, Center has done an extraordinary job elevating the debate about what it is to be an American. And I truly do believe that looking at our past is an essential element of understanding who we are today. Civics education plays a hugely important role in that. And the National Constitution Center, I hope that you all continue to support it, is on the vanguard of making a difference in this very, very important area. Civics education has eroded. When I was governor, I mentored every Wednesday morning from 8 to 9 o'clock or 7 to 8, I can't remember now. And Donna Calloway was the principal of the Raw Middle School. And she always gave me the kid that was the most confused, most disorganized, the one that she thought that maybe I could, because she knew I was coming every Wednesday morning, that I could have an influence on their lives. And I would spend my time organizing the paper, down at the bottom of the bag, because it was like fossil fuels were being created. It was very, these are kids that were really struggling. And then I would always migrate to the social studies book, because I couldn't do science and math at 7th grade as well as I could do social studies, I guess. And the lack of commitment to our past, this was 10 years ago, in the social study book was really troubling to me. The moral equivalence of people in our history, when we have the founders of this country were not perfect, and they were only men, I got all that. But George Washington, equal to Hiawatha? No. George Washington, but for him, we probably would be a monarchy today. But for him, we might be a colony. Who knows? I don't know how history would play out, but the idea that we wouldn't understand our history, warts and all, is something that is deeply troubling to me. From stem to stern, we need to raise the level of our understanding, and civics education needs to be at the core of that. I'm not big on mandates, but I believe this is one place where there should be mandates. Every kid in this country should have an understanding of our history and should respect it and understand where it went wrong and where it went right, but understand that the American experience is about the journey. It's not necessarily about the past, but it's about rectifying the problems and moving on and constantly moving forward. We've lost our ability to look over the horizon in the future because we've lost some sense of connectivity to our past. So I urge you to continue to provide support to this great organization because they truly are on the vanguard of making civics education in all sorts of creative and interesting ways important. Another person that's made that the case as well is a guy who wrote and created the play Hamilton. Lin-Manuel Miranda is the most amazing guy. I mean, to think about, he found Alexander Hamilton really extraordinary and exciting. And now thousands and thousands of kids think that way as well. The proper civics education is not just in a book, but it is across the board finding new exciting ways to turn our history on so that we're prepared to deal with the future. In closing, I hope that you recognize that there needs to be a sense of urgency about this. I hope you understand that transforming our education system is probably the single most important thing that we all can play a constructive role in to assure that we regain our footing and move forward. Incremental change can yield systemic change. That's how it's always happened. But there needs to be a little bit more urgency. A kid 12 years from now that is in kindergarten, if his life is not transformed through a better quality education, that child is doomed. There are children being born in public hospitals across this country today, living near or at the poverty level, that if we don't alter their lives by improving the quality of education, they'll never have a job. And the lack of purposeness in their lives will be a strain not just on their family's life and their life, but all of our lives. People should be marching in the streets to assure that every child gains the power of knowledge. I'll be marching. I hope you will too. Thank you. Thanks. You coming?
Wow, that was superb. Thank you so much for that passionate call to arms. You heard it, ladies and gentlemen. The governor's passion for education is palpable. Another round of applause. I never asked you this when we worked together, but where did that passion come from?
You know, my mom, to start with, I was totally talking about winning the lottery. I was Barbara Bush's son, so I learned early a joy for reading, an appreciation of how that can change your life. So that was truly a blessing. But it was a lot of different things. I was Secretary of Commerce, and I saw that education, even in 1986, was the leading criteria for business relocations. Didn't dawn on me until I began to interact with businesses that were considering investing in parts of our state. As a candidate, I went to visit, in 1998, I went to visit 250 schools. So that was kind of if you think about it, in summertime, schools aren't open. I was cranking out about 3 or 4 a day. And my views back then were considered radical. And if you asked Randy Weingarten today, she would still consider them radical, I guess. The unions don't like my views, which is fine. But so I went into the Lion's Den every day and just got an appreciation for the struggle, for teachers that are kind of trapped in the system that needs to change. It motivated me to whether they liked my ideas or not, to be more, passionate about it. And then the one story I tell about low expectations that I think just set me off was, in Florida, we had a high school graduation test. Some states to this day, I don't believe, have them. Maybe all of them do now, but we had an 8th grade level graduation test. I mean, some of this stuff is so bizarre that you think, well, why are we calling it a high school graduation test if it's for 8th grade? Maybe you should have a 12th grade test, but that was me. So this kid was taking the test the next day for the 3rd time and the last time. He would not graduate. Florida was 50th in this country in graduation rates in 1998. We couldn't whisper, thank God for name your other state that was below us. We were the thank God, every other state said thank God for Florida. This kid was in Seminole High School in Central Florida, and the question was, a baseball game starts at 3, how long is the game? He couldn't answer it. It just broke my heart. And I have, scores of stories like this. How could it be that a child would go through K through 12 and not be able to, and he wasn't intellectually challenged, he didn't have developmental disabilities of any kind, That was the system that existed before Crazy Jeb became governor. And it really angered me that we would just accept that we would put that child on a path. I don't know where he ended up. I hope that he ended up a successful person. But would you be happy if your child couldn't answer that question? And that was the level of aptitude with no accountability around each child. So the kids that could achieve great things and had parents that loved them and sent them off to do tutoring and all that stuff, they probably did pretty good. But a whole swath of Florida's children weren't getting any kind of education at all. And that kind of was the catalyst for me to say, well, maybe the rest of all these other people may not think this is important, but I do. And I'm going to be governor. I'm going to win this time. I lost the first time. I'm going to win, and I'm going to remember that. Then my son was a teacher in 1998, and he got his car keyed. Car keyed, right? Keyed, across the, because he was my boy. The union messed up his car. So when I got elected on my first day, on the day after the election, I went to Mass, and I went to the Liberty City Charter School, the school that I set up, and then I went down to Homestead High School and shook the hand of the head of the teachers union down there. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you're smiling with cameras or just in general and you give them the handshake, like trying to break their knuckles. So I'm pretty passionate about this stuff because there's a lot of people passionate on the other side that don't have as an organizing principle whether that kid could answer that baseball question or not. They're interested, legitimately so, in the economic interests of the adults in the system. That's what they're there for. They're not there. Al Shanker said it best, who was the great labor teacher union leader. He said the minute they start paying their dues, I'll represent them as well. Something to the effect. That's not their job. Their job is to focus on the economic interests of the adults, and they do a good job at it, but people need to be starting to think about how the children do well.
Those Florida numbers are really impressive, the rise in achievement, and it sounds like the centerpiece of it is an idea you talked about, which is tailoring education to the aptitude of each kid rather than just teaching to the middle. You were telling me about a theorist who you think represents the most exciting thinking in education today. Tell the audience about that.
Yeah, so Florida's success was we had no accountability, and we created the most robust accountability around every kid. That's our greatest gains, and then we put money behind the things that would allow children to learn how to read, particularly in the early grades. We focused on early childhood reading because kids couldn't, we could have had, Jeff, 32% of our third graders be held back under the system that we set up. And this was my re-election year, so there was a lot riding on this. So we not only created the eat your broccoli moment, of no social promotion, we're not kidding, but we also put resources and passion and commitment around assuring that children had access to learning how to read. It's one thing to say, tough luck, you're staying back. The other thing is to say, we're going to make sure that we give you new approaches to learn. So that was probably our, and school choice would be the two things that Florida led with. This new idea of customizing learning, personalized learning, is being developed kind of as we speak. And it's based on the notion that children learn in different ways. They learn in different pace. They learn, we have a dramatically diverse group of students. And to expect them to learn all the same way probably didn't make sense 50 years ago. It certainly doesn't make sense now. So using technology for teachers to be able to harness technology, to customize the learning experience, I think is the next step in reform. And Todd Rose is an author that has written, he's a Harvard professor, he's written a book called The End of Average. And this principle, by the way, goes way beyond education. It goes to the society as a whole. The average, everything is, starting in the 1910, 1920 period, according to Todd, we started this efficiency movement where we created math models around every aspect of our lives, I guess, and we used the law of averages to kind of organize society. So he rejects that notion, and I think he makes a pretty compelling case that we should reject it out of hand. And we now have the tools. Back in 1920, it had been hard to get beyond that, right? But today we can. You know why children stumble on a particular subject. I don't know if anybody here has gone on to the Khan Academy website to help their grandkid or kid do math. That is an example of personalized learning. Imagine that in the form of a curriculum where children learn at their own pace in their own way, and when they master the material, they're not sitting around waiting for the next material. They go and master new things. And that could be done in traditional classroom settings where there's not the stigma of some kids struggling and some kids succeeding, that chronologically they're moving together in the education system, and they do things like all schools do. They do sports together, they do the extracurricular activities together. But why would we want a kid that could be an 8th grade reader to just be stuck in 6th grade or 5th grade? And why would we expect a kid that was a 1st grade reader that their self-esteem was more important than whether they could read? Do you think their self-esteem is going to be too hot when they can't graduate from high school because they're illiterate? I mean, this bizarre notion needs to be ruptured, and I think the fastest way to rupture this paradigm we're in today is to move to this customized learning experience.
Those Brookings numbers you cited are really sobering. 39% of college kids polled think that the First Amendment protects hate speech. 44% think it does not. The Supreme Court has said it does. So how do we teach kids that it does? We've got this great interactive Constitution tool.
That's it.
But it absolutely is. So we've got to bring it to every American.
So Jeff, there was another statistic that I didn't cite that you probably know, which is, was it a quarter of all students said that violence against, is it a quarter or 20%?
20%.
20% of college students said it was okay for violent action against speech that they found hateful. Wow, I mean, I missed that. How that would be, when did that emerge? I mean, that is, now, and hate speech is defined, the way you want to define it. Your feelings are hurt, it's hate speech. This guy, Ben Shapiro, spoke at the University of Berkeley. He's Jewish, and he was called a Nazi. And he correctly pointed out as he put his yarmulke off, no, I'm not a Nazi. In fact, Nazis attack me because I attack them. He's provocative. That's what he is. He's a conservative provocateur. If you read his speech, you would think there's nothing close to hatefulness in this speech at all. You might not agree with every part of it, but there's nothing that would be defined as hatefulness. But the University of California at Berkeley spent $700,000, $800,000 providing security for this, creating the environment that required all this police protection for a guy who did not say anything that was nearly hateful. I mean, we've defined hate downward, and we're tolerating this just intolerance, and lacking diversity. So I think the answer is to start earlier. I mean, you're not going to change someone's mindset as a sophomore in college if they believe that, but I think you can change young people's thinking at an earlier age that the Constitution matters, that these protections are extraordinary, they're unique to the world, that the founders envisioned our country to be, our citizens to be free from an oppressive government. Much of the Constitution is to protect us from our government, not the other way around, like many constitutions around the world. All of that has not been taught for a long while. And that's what needs to change, and it'll take a while, but I think that's the answer is to start at an early age.
But just one more beat on this. So we have to teach kids that you can only ban speech if it's intended to and likely to cause imminent violence. That's what the Supreme Court said. But this interactive Constitution is kind of wonky, and you talk about tailoring it. Yeah. So we are doing a partnership with Khan Academy. They're doing their first social studies videos with the interactive Constitution. But what other kinds of partnerships and technologies can we use to make this accessible to learners of all ages? Well,
first of all, the interactive Constitution, if you haven't gone online, I hope you did while I was speaking. And I mean, it's a lively discussion. You have young people doing the work, not some old white guy. So that's smart. I think continuing down that path. For the National Constitution Center, I think there's a lot of, I don't think you need to reinvent a lot of wheels. There's a lot of partners willing to do this. Khan Academy is a great example. The College Board, invigorating. You were participating in the reconstitution of their AP history there was quite a controversy. They listened, they adjusted. It's a more robust product now. I think we talked about Arizona State University aspiring to teach 1 million kids using online learning on a global basis. They have a venture with Starbucks. For every associate in Starbucks, they can get educated at Arizona State University online. Julie, the largest virtual school outside of the 2 for-profit schools, I believe, the largest one is Florida Virtual School. That's another place where you could extend the reach. If you build the best software, if you will, then I think the question is, how do you start partnering with all sorts of other people to get the message out? And then foundations like mine can help go state by state and urge for the inclusion of civics education to graduate from high school. As we dumb things down and erode our expectations, Algebra 2, there was a big move maybe 10, 15 years ago. Algebra 2 was important, and then God forbid, there was accountability around it, and kids weren't doing that well, so they stopped it. No more Algebra 2. Well, that'd be another place that you may want to relook at the mandate, because these are courses that lead to the jobs that there's severe shortages in. And certainly civics education would be coding, algebra, civics education. In the postmodern world we're living in, those would be 3 that aren't necessarily mandated to graduate from high school. They should be.
One reason schools have shied away from civics is because it's become so politicized, and people are afraid about teaching history. The Constitution Center's solution is nonpartisan, but it's kind of specific. How do you feel about the politicization of teaching history?
I gave you my view about the social studies book for 7th grade. I think we do these books. I actually, when I did this experience of mentoring, I ended up asking the question, I should have known it in advance, how the heck do we make textbooks? And what I found was there's these committees. There's not a lot of accountability on how the textbooks are done. There should be a full understanding of what students are learning. And I think it is politicized because we're living in a political world, but it's also not robust. I mean, it's not alive. It's just not, it doesn't describe to the full extent the extraordinary nature of our country. And yeah, I mean, it's not a perfect history, but it's certainly a history that has led the world. And for those that don't believe that, I mean, I just think I respectfully disagree. Warts and all, this is something worth knowing a lot more about. First of all, whatever mistakes we've made in the past, we're going to learn, if you don't know them, you're not going to learn from them. And whatever goodness has come from our past, we should be applying it going forward as well to restore those principles that have made us extraordinary. So I think it's easy to non-politicize this for institutions like yours, where you're not. I mean, Jeff has done a phenomenal job. I think my second meeting maybe with you was you had just gotten here, and being a conservative, the offering was kind of tilted, let's just say, this way. I said, look, it'll be a lot more fun and lively if you allow for conservative voices, libertarian voices, mainstream liberal voices, hardcore left voices to come. As long as they have a respect for the Constitution, 10 voices are better than 1, right? And he's done an extraordinary job allowing for many voices to be heard. And the one shared common feature is a love for the Constitution. That is what we need more of, and you're on the vanguard of that. And I appreciate it. I hope you all do too.
Thank you for that.
You didn't know all those conservative people that showed up here were as civil as you. I'm just joking. I'm joking.
Nor the liberal people, and what is so meaningful about this is when you ask people to set aside their politics and talk about their Constitution, people become civil. It brings out the best angels of their nature, and it's just a meaningful
Well, think
experience.
about, in this whole context of divided government, protecting us from the government that we have, and envisioning these, I mean, the forward-leaning nature of the founders in crafting the Constitution is extraordinary. They were literally thinking way over the horizon. And undergirding all this is consensus, compromise, reaching, this way rather than that way. Without it, we're starting to see what it looks like. And it's butt ugly. I mean, it's just ugly. It is really ugly. And restoring, I mean, there needs to be, the consensus muscle has atrophied. I'll tell you a quick story because John McCain is going to be awarded the highest honor here later this month, and well-deserved, great patriot. So he was the committee chair in the Veterans overseeing the Veterans Administration. Bernie Sanders was the ranking member, as they call it. And then the House had a similar situation, Republican Jeff Miller and a Democratic counterpart. And they passed pretty meaningful legislation 4 or 5 years ago, as I understand it, on the first iteration of veterans reform after a lot of the scandals came out. So 2 bills. This would be like how a bill is made on public television. House passed a bill, Senate passed a bill. They go to conference. And Senator McCain told me, asked him about this, he told me the story that none of the other members, they started trying to renegotiate what had been agreed upon. So with conference, typically, you take the 4 or 5 items where there's a disagreement and you work on those. They started unraveling what they'd already agreed to. And McCain being, he's known for, not his temper, I don't know what it would, he gets volatile, let's just say that. He starts shouting some things that can't be repeated and says, I'm going to go on the bleeping Senate floor and I'm going to call you all out because none of you know how to legislate. And if you think about it, over the last, yes sir, Senator McCain, they all realized that was probably true, so they passed it. But if you think about the last 10 years or more, there hasn't been many conference committees. You have a lot of new members in the Congress, and they're 2 armed camps. And even when they agree, they can't agree. Because if they agree, their leadership spanks them, or back home they're perceived to be, they have to be worried if they're on the left, people on the harder left will go on them. If they're on the right, people on the harder right. And all of that is really dangerous if it was a parliamentary system, it'd be fine. You just crush the opposition. You win until you lose, and then they come in and do the same. That's not our system. Our system is designed for consensus. And the idea that somehow that's a sign of weakness to seek creative solutions, to find win-wins, is just ridiculous and dangerous. Most states have figured this out, Jeff. I mean, the contagion hasn't spread to 45 of the states. I mean, okay, well, maybe not here, but in Connecticut and Illinois. But a lot of states actually, most states operate with 60 days. They pass the budget, they go home. They come back next year, they do the same thing. And normally the budget passes with broad majorities. Most bills pass with extra majorities in most places in our democracy because they do the consensus thing a lot better than D.C.
I told you about this exciting new project to resurrect Madisonian values of consensus, which the John Templeton Foundation is supporting, asking what would Madison think of our current Congress, presidency, courts, and media, and how can we resurrect Madisonian values of compromise and deliberation today?
I think the first thing he'd say is, I'll be part of it. The first thing I think he would say is, what the heck is Twitter? I'm not sure this was part of my game plan.
He absolutely would have, because Federalist 10 says the worst thing that can happen in it is for the president and representatives to communicate directly with the constituents. But that you're not. Madison feared social media because you're supposed to have filtered deliberation, not direct communication.
You told me that already. That's why I brought it up, because I knew that you would.
It's a great. But you're just feeding this stuff to me. Constitutional red meat. It's just beautiful. Well, I would love to continue this, as you can tell, everyone, but look at all these incredible questions we have, so I've got to ask you something. I'm going to do that now. Of your 7 ideas, which one has the best chance of being embraced, and why, and what can we do to help?
Well, we're a Federalist country as it relates to education. We used to be a Federalist country as it related to just about everything. That's why the 10th Amendment is maybe the one amendment that's been trampled on the most. So this is not one thing in 50 states. That's not how it works. And in fact, it shouldn't work that way. It shouldn't be imposed from up above. But I do think school choice can be the catalyst for improvement. And then accountability and transparency is an essential element of any system that we move towards. If you don't measure, you don't know. You just don't, and you don't care. Now, how you measure is a challenge because we over-test, and then people think the curriculum is being narrowed. You have to be able to have real accountability where you measure appropriately to know whether a child's getting a year's worth of knowledge in a year's time. Those two things are the foundation. But the innovations that would come, I think, will come from outside the education system and be brought in. The idea of personalized learning is one good example of that. All the training programs that major corporations do have personalized learning. They use the building block of you master the material, you move on to the next, you move on to the next, and it's the most effective way to learn and to train. So I think there's all sorts of innovations that would come, but high expectations, real accountability, and parents being more involved in where their child goes to school and a diverse offering that exists would be the path towards better learning.
There are several questions about parents. How about educating parents so they know how to choose schools, preschool programs? What's the role of the parent in children's education, in your view?
Great. It's essential. I mean, I just said it. So they have to be informed consumers, if you will. If they don't have information about what's best for their kids, then they'll make similar kind of decisions that the bureaucrats that decide where kids are assigned will. You've got to give parents the information tools. Most states do a lousy job of this. They don't provide easy access to how schools are doing. We get, everything. If you want to go online and find any product, any service, it's there at your fingertip. And you get pretty deep understanding. People provide consumer inputs. You make an informed choice. Education, some states do this better than others, but that needs to be upgraded. But here's where I've had disagreements with a lot of people that are well-meaning. I just think by pushing parents away, you make it harder for them to be engaged. If you give them the responsibility, you're going to get a far better outcome in terms of their involvement. And parents have to play a huge role in this. It's a struggle to be a classroom teacher today if parental engagement's at an all-time low. It's a real hardship for the teachers. So rather than excuse away why kids can't learn, maybe we should empower parents to be partners in the learning experience. And so the informed consumer is essential for this. We should do that, by the way, for college as well. A student should not be going to college without knowing whether or not they can get a 4-year degree in 4 years if they want to. A student should not be going to college without knowing what degree, not dictating to them what degree they pursue, but if they know the unemployment rate for a certain profession is 40% because we have a huge surplus, and there's shortages for as far as the eye can see in others where you get 3 times as much money, that information might be useful for a student as they start on life's journey, particularly if they're borrowing recourse debt to finance it all. I mean, if you want to be a full-time equivalent student, you should graduate. If you have the capacity to do that, you ought to have the right to graduate with a 4-year degree in 4 years. I mean, what am I missing here? But you can't. And the information, people change their degrees. You can't get the degree. I did this exercise when I was governor. I was kind of a data nerd, so I asked some poor soul that worked in my office, give me the vacancy rates by time of day for our university system. And so Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, the vacancy rate, as I recall, was like 25%. Which is that was high efficiency. Thursdays it went down. Fridays, it was an act of God to get a course. We've invented the 4-day work week in college already. The French didn't invent it. In fact, here's another one of those stories where I got in trouble. I said that the university systems have embraced the French work week. I got a call from the ambassador of France. Who knew? They don't have a 4-day work week. We've just been told that. They work actually 5 days, according to the ambassador. So I apologized profusely and showed my solidarity with the country of France. But there should be greater information in education across the board, lifelong. I mean, you should know what the consequences are of what you're getting into.
Some good questions about school funding, both general and specific. How should public schools be funded fairly so each student gets what he or she needs? Where should school funding dollars come from, and more specifically, Philadelphia has recently embraced the community school model despite little evidence of their effectiveness. Can you comment?
Yeah, that could mean many different things, so I'm not going to opine about something I don't know, the community model, but here's the great challenge. We hear these numbers of per student funding, and they are, other than Luxembourg and Belgium, the highest in the world, I promise you. They really are. But if you break it down, a lot of that money is not going to the classroom because it's going for previously negotiated pension arrangements and health benefits for, the sins of the past, if you will. So a classroom teacher today has not seen the same kind of growth in their salary as the overall cost of education has grown. So in states like Florida, where we don't have these out-year pension obligations that are as large as places perhaps like here or Jersey and other of the bigger government states up north, dollar per dollar, we may be spending as much in the classroom. So one of the things I think would be really helpful is to actually have a true accounting for this. Every taxpayer and every mom and dad and every teacher that's working today should know how that $10,000, in the case of Philadelphia, I'm sure it's more, say $15,000 per student, where it goes. And what you'd find is they'd be shocked because everybody thinks our schools are underfunded. And everybody thinks our schools are funded about half of what they actually are. And they're kind of right because the schools aren't being funded. We're funding all sorts of other obligations that don't relate to the current cadre of students in our schools. So true accountability would be just to lay it out. And I think that would change a lot of people's thinking about the underfunded nature of schools. It might require some concessions made so that kids can learn. I don't know. I mean, each state would deal with this differently.
I think time for two more questions. They're all great. What is the biggest...
Can I make one other point about this? Because this is a place that's not just related to education, it's also local and state government in general. It's pretty easy when you're a politician to underfund the pension liabilities. You just don't appropriate the money, right? So the employer contribution has to be appropriated. There are states that fund zero on an annual basis. They've made the commitment to past workers who have or there's an expectation they're going to get this money, but they haven't put the money up to make it actuarially sound. So I'm not blaming the people that receive these benefits. They're frankly probably going to lose them unless politicians step up and fulfill their obligations. This is a huge problem in many places, and we're going to start seeing not just Puerto Rico, not just Illinois, but other states and municipalities, big cities in some cases, have the equivalent of bankruptcy because they've not had the fortitude to do what's right in the beginning. They haven't shown the frugality of John Templeton. They haven't shown, you pay as you go. You don't pass the bottle of bourbon, have a great time, and pass on the bill to the next generation. We're doing that across the board, but the local and state pension obligations now are unfunded to the tune of trillions of dollars. And teachers will be suffering because of that as much as anything else.
This question may be related, but it asked, what's the biggest obstacle in transforming curriculum and adopting them for jobs in the new economy?
I think it's the resistance inside the system to be held to account. I think that's a significant part of this. But as it relates to the higher expectations in general, I don't think Americans have seen the nexus between high quality education results and what the jobs of the future. I don't think we've totally understood that schools worked really well till they stopped working. And when they stopped working, we kept doing the same thing. It's not that they stopped working, they kept working the old way, and our economy is radically different, and it's moving faster in that direction than ever before. Every major company is figuring out how to increase productivity by artificial intelligence, by dramatic automation of every business process possible, of wireless technology. The convergence of all these things is exponential change, not just incremental change. And yet our systems around us, that the mitigating institutions in our society that have kind of kept us intact, and when we take 2 steps back instead of 1 step forward, give us a chance to dust ourselves off and get back moving forward. Those have eroded. They haven't changed, or they're not as useful as they once were. And so the K-12 system, to me, is the place where we could have the quickest impact of meeting this challenge. There are other things that are equally important, but this is the place where every student could be impacted in a positive way.
Here's a great last question at the Constitution Center. What can high schools do to empower teaching about government, to inspire students with an eventual desire to serve as better citizens?
Well, again, I think we've got to mandate it for starters so that everybody has to get into the game to do it. I would think that in the environment we're in now, where we have the political class is talking at each other, around each other, yelling at each other, you're seeing the byproduct of this hyperpartisanship that is yielded some pretty, it's a dangerous time in that regard, that someone inside of a school would say, it's my duty to make sure that the next generation isn't broken up in its disparate parts, that we're not becoming a nation of tribes, that we're Americans. This tribalism that exists where we organize our lives around people that have the same views we have, which is so easy to do today. Do you all customize your news? You get your news from a source? Might be different than mine, who knows? My views are, if I don't force myself to read the New York Times, my views are always validated. And I become really righteous about my views. And I probably am less tolerant of other people's views. Well, believe it or not, that's all of us. That's what's happening. And so we're louder, we're not consensus-oriented, we tolerate vulgarity, we accept the loud voices that aren't achieving anything, we accept it in the political discourse. And so the next generation needs to be taught in a different way to get beyond that. We've messed it up. Most of us are generally, you're younger, but most of us are generally in the same age group. We've blown it in this regard, and the rebuilding and fortifying of our culture, I think, has to start from the bottom up.
Governor Bush, your passion for education is inspiring. Thank you for your service to the Constitution Center and to America.
Thank you. It was fun. Thank you. Let me get my